Hello, this is Chef John from foodwishes.com with Viking stew. That's right, I love anything Vikings. So I decided to make a stew similar to what they might have enjoyed. But don't worry, this is not one of those thoroughly researched recipes that's accurate and doesn't taste good. Oh no, this one's poorly researched, but very delicious, especially with the Viking flatbread we're going to talk about later. But first things first, and to get started we have to cut up our meat, which ideally is a wild boar we killed with our own hands. But if you can't or won't do that, you could just use a pork shoulder from the store. And as usual, if there are some natural separations in the meat, we can start our cuts there. And I'm going to try to cut this into about 2-inch pieces. But really, the size is up to you. I mean, you are after all the Valkyrie of how big these chunks should be. And as long as you cut the pieces fairly uniform, you're going to be fine. Oh, and if you're not into pork, there are a lot of other options the Vikings would have had 1,000 years ago. And you could use beef or lamb or goat or venison, or even bear, if you dare. But no matter what you use, once we cut that up, we will transfer it into a nice big pot or a Dutch oven like this, and we will season it up with some salt, as well as one of the Vikings' favorite ingredients, some nice sweet honey. And then for some additional sweetness and tartness, we will add another Viking favorite, some berries. And I'm going with a nice big handful of blackberries, as well as a nice big spoon of preserved lingonberries, which they probably would have used fresh, but I didn't have those. And then what we'll do is head down to the stream and get some nice cold fresh water, and we'll pour in about 6 cups, or enough to cover the meat, and we'll give things a quick stir and turn our heat to high so we can bring this up to a boil. And while we're waiting for that, we can peel some garlic cloves and throw those in, along with some dried thyme, plus a little bit of ground coriander, which, fun fact, is actually the seeds from the plant we call cilantro. And that's it. Like I said, we'll wait for this to come to a rolling boil, at which point we'll reduce our heat to low, and we'll give this the old poka-poka to settle things down. Oh yeah, the old poka-poka is a very old technique. And then once we have this cooking at a nice low, gentle simmer, we will let it go for about 45 minutes, to give our meat a little bit of a head start before we start to add our veggies. And for this, I decided to use some fennel bulbs, as well as a nice big onion, a small head of green cabbage, a couple leeks, as well as some brown mushrooms, and then last but not least, 3 nice big carrots, which from what I hear, back then were probably purple. And what we'll do is prep those while our stew cooks, and then after about 45 minutes, we'll transfer in our onion and our leek, as well as our mushrooms that I've cut in half. And we will poke all that down in. And no, I did not try to get all my mushrooms with the rounded side up. That just somehow magically happened. Probably because Odin had his eye on me. But anyway, what we'll do is let this continue simmering, stirring occasionally, for another 45 minutes or so, at which point it's probably going to look something like this. And at this point our meat should be almost, but not quite fork tender yet. So to finish this off, we'll add the rest of our veggies, which will be our cabbage, carrots, and fennel. And we will stir all that in, and we'll continue simmering for maybe 30 to 40 minutes, or until our meat and the veggies we just added are nice and tender. And by the way, historically speaking, pretty much any root vegetable would be appropriate to add to this. Except no potatoes. Those came from the New World, much later. But anyway, things like turnips or rutabagas would have been very common. But I'm actually not a huge fan of those, and I feel like those can sometimes overwhelm the flavor of the stew. So I didn't add them, but if you're into them, go ahead. And then as far as exactly when this is done, we're not going to guess. We're going to find a nice big piece of meat and test it with a fork, which should slide in with no effort. And I'm happy to report my carrots were also cooked perfectly as well. And that's it. Once everything's tender, all we need to do is give this a taste, just in case we feel like the broth needs a little more salt, or if you want it sweeter, a little more honey, or if you want it tangier, you could add a splash of vinegar, which was also commonly used. But for me, this tasted absolutely perfect, so I ladled up a nice big bowl next to some Viking flatbread, and I garnished the top with a nice big pinch of fresh herb, which included flowering thyme, some coriander, and of course some dill, maybe the Vikings' favorite herb. And after turning over that one small upside-down leaf between shots, I took a bunch of pictures before grabbing a spoon and tearing off a piece of bread and going in for the official taste. And that, my friends, despite the very primitive cooking method, really did turn out amazingly well. All right, even though we didn't sear the meat, which is a modern technique, this stew is still very savory and extremely flavorful thanks to all those aromatic vegetables. But while very comforting and hearty and satisfying, this is also surprisingly light on the palate. All right, besides searing, with our modern stews, we usually do some kind of roux or other thickener, so that our meat and veggies are kind of swimming in a gravy. But every once in a while, it's very nice to go this brothy route. And sure, if you have to call it a soup, call it a soup. But what would you rather have for dinner? Viking soup or Viking stew? All right, that's what I thought. So we're going stew. Oh, and in the spirit of full disclosure, there was one minor thing I wasn't crazy about. Those tiny little seeds from the blackberries I found a little bit annoying. But having said that, 1,000 years ago, they definitely weren't going to strain out the seeds. So I guess that's the price I paid for trying to be authentic. But just between you and me and Freya, you might want to toss the berries in a blender and then strain out the seeds before you add it. But other than that, I thought this came out amazingly well. Oh, and as I already mentioned, the Viking flatbread is going to be the next video. And I don't want to give too many spoilers, but thanks to using some ancient grains and buttermilk instead of water, this might be my new favorite way to make flatbread. So please stay tuned for that. But no matter what you serve with this, or which meat you end up using, I thought this ancient, primitive, but still sophisticated stew was really wonderful, which is why I really do hope you give it a try soon. So please follow the links below for the ingredient amounts, a printable written recipe, and much more info as usual. And as always, enjoy.